So today is the release day of all the Fiends of Hell,
Yep.
and first off, that is probably the most heavy metal title that you heard. Not just you, but is there a more heavy metal title really for any book? That is incredible. And we spoke before about how it started off as a screenplay, but I understand if we want the real origin story, we need to go back to your childhood and the first time that you experienced War of the Worlds.
Yep. Yep. I heard that when I was a child in New Zealand. We were visiting some family friends, and to keep my brother and I amused, they said, "Oh, listen to this," and they put the Jeff Wayne record on, which I think had come out that year, 77 or 78, and I was terrified by the bits Richard Burton narrates, mesmerized but terrified, and the story happens that terrible June. I was listening to it in June, and I took that for a portent, an omen, a sign. Um, so I was frightened, but I was captivated by it. And then I was bought the record, and I listened to it so much. And it was read to us, and we listened to a radio dramatization as well. And then I read it myself, and I still read it every few years. Um, and it was like, I guess it was my first encounter with like cosmic horror. So, as a child, I'd had childlike fears of gravity reversing and would be overawed at times looking at the night sky and trying to fathom that with like a 4-year-old brain, and constantly clamoring for reassurance from my parents. Um, but that listening to War of the Worlds, it made the whole idea of Armageddon or an apocalypse seem very vivid and credible to my imagination as a child. So I think that kind of impact that a story has on you at that time, it's going to come out in some form later. So I've always been interested in the kind of alien invasion. And it was the right time the last few years with everything going on, I think, with the pandemic and um, the war in Europe, these kind of epochal, monumental events that threaten civilization with collapse. Everything changes, anything can happen, all bets are off. You know, it's not a feeling I particularly wanted to experience again, but certainly did for a couple of years. And I think this book is partly a response to that. And also just the sheer um, euphoria, I think, of imaginatively investing yourself into situations, which is one of the things I love when I read War of the Worlds, is well, what would I do? How would I survive? Where would I hide? And you kind of, you imagine yourself in the role of characters in those situations. The kind of unlimited freedom combined with, I guess, intense anxiety and jeopardy all of the time. And another idea that's interested me for years is just dereliction, where everything, a kind of Mary Celeste situation, everything is as it was when something happened, and you're left to witness it and explore it, and there's no one else around, and nothing is barred to you. So the empty village at the beginning was me kind of exploring that interest. You can go into everything and see everything, and something isn't right, but it remains enigmatic. Um, so yeah, it was in some ways it was a lot of fun to write, and it's it's quite different to my other novels in that I kind of feel this one was almost all pure story and character because it was an event. It didn't that didn't require lots of research like my other books did. It was very much a story happening in the now, um, to a handful of characters. So yeah, something different, and a change of theme and ideas from the last three books.
Yeah, I think there's something primal in that being alone. And that, we take it for granted that there's always going to be other people. And so we talk about, like what's our greatest fears? Our greatest fears, well, we don't want to die. We fear, things that we don't know. But being alone is to me, I feel like that's very primal. And that's because we spend a lot of our time alone, but are we truly alone? You
Mm.
know, and then when there's no one else that you can see or hear, that to me that's devastating to know that you could be the only one left. That
And
would
your whole
be
perception changes.
right.
Your mind will turn on itself almost immediately,
Mm-hmm.
and your thoughts just boom.
Yeah.
So when I think I agree with you, Bob. And when you're approaching that in a story, you have to really kind of get inside the experience imaginatively. I think to make it credible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you
Which
did. There's a sense of alienness, and not that kind yet. But at the beginning of the story, it's there's just very very scary, you know, feeling, and I think it's a universal fear. I mean, we've seen it. There's a reason why the War of the Worlds is being adapted so many times, not just because it's in public domain and all that, but because the story is a universal story. And it's a story about us and how alone we are. And it's, it's just a classic story. And when you mentioned that, that was the first time I'd even put the two together, you know, because it stands on its own outside of any other type of influences. It's that I was like, oh yeah, it is kind of World of Worlds. I never put it together.
Yeah, I mean, War of the Worlds is what I love about the beginning of War of the Worlds is that kind of apprehension. It's both anxiety and excitement.
Mm-hmm.
Something has landed, something has intruded, which is a cause of concern, but also great excitement. And then War of the Worlds becomes this. It's this incredible like retreat of refugees through a devastated landscape. It's a really harrowing book. There are some
Mm-hmm.
scenes in that you know they really are disturbing. I think mine was. I wanted more the idea of very few people, and those that remained were all completely clueless or incapable,
Right.
both physically and mentally incapable. Only the incapable were left behind, which creates um, a unique set of challenges. To what degree, if you're able-bodied, are you responsible?
Mm-hmm.
So that, I guess the question was as well, was how good are you? How good was the character? He didn't think he was good. He hadn't really been responsible for anything.
Mm-hmm.
How does someone meet that challenge? And so often, I think Alien Invasion, there's stories about human agency, how mankind rallies, and how our ingenuity and resourcefulness and kind of teamwork and so forth, we put up an opposition to something inexplicable that's invaded the earth. But I thought what was more interesting was, it's a done deal right from day one. There is no opposition. There is no help coming.
Right.
And there's probably no means of defeating what's here. It's a question of both survival and how you behave. Um, and also making it feel almost like a religious event.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know if you picked up on that.
Oh yeah, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
there were, I mean, I even wrote in my kind of notes about this that in many ways this has been your most biblical book. I mean, certainly very much of the Revelation school of the Bible, this nightmarish vision, but this is kind of hell on earth. And I mean, when I first started reading it, because I tried to go into things as cold as possible, so I hadn't read any of the blurb. I didn't know this was a novel of alien horror. And so, I mean, given the title, I thought probably the antagonists are literally coming from hell, as it were.
Mm,
And it reminded me, particularly at the start, of the likes of 28 Days Later and Silent Hill, just this absolute disquietingness, this almost Lynchian Twin Peaks beginning where something is just off and this isolation. And I knew something absolutely awful was coming, but I didn't know what it was. And you're just building this dread throughout.
great. Well, that's the effect that was intended and desired. So,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a masterclass of building dread. I mean, you seriously ramp it up with each, and here's the thing: it's not like I need to put more dread in here. These events happen organically, and it's a testament to good storytelling because it's, like I said, it's a masterclass in dread. It just ramps up until it's almost at a fever pitch, and I loved it.
oh well, thank you very much. It's very kind. And it can be really simple things. The more I thought about it, like it's not just the emptiness, but things that you associate with kind of routine and order and the rules and regulations that kind of marshal us. Just sort of traffic lights changing, and I think even in that situation, you would still stop on red. Um, well, that's good to hear. There's one on the biblical thing. I just pop away to my record collection over here rather than going to get a book.
All
Okay.
right, gonna get gonna get the music in the horror.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's too late to put music on. Here we go. Yeah, this was a painting that my dad had lots of books on art, and I used to love these paintings by um, Bruegel and Bosch, and this is Black Sabbath's Greatest
Yeah.
Hits, which
Oh yeah.
you may be familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
um, but depicted. And I used to look at the painting in this book, and it was again something when I was younger. There's kind of some sort of invasion in progress, and this, the light has changed, the sky has changed. There's people on gibbets. There's fires in the background. There's these sort of things appearing, and people being towed around on wagons and fed into things, and it was
Mm-hmm.
blowing my mind when I was a kid. So it was those kind of paintings that really gave me a kind of aesthetic to
Mm-hmm.
aim for, um, and just something really as simple as changes in light
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
was like a kind of motif through the book. But yeah, well, I'm glad you guys liked it. Um, and I would have loved to seen it as a film or a TV series.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that that can come to fruition.
There's always a chance, but I'm not counting my chickens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Speaking of which, I mean, the character Bob, I know the
Oh,
actor's
yeah.
Australian. Yeah, I know the actor that I'm gonna mention is Australian, but the guy who came to mind as soon as he started talking was John Jarrett from Wolf Creek,
Oh,
and he because just the cadence and delivery of his lines, I could just imagine him just adapting a little bit more of a British accent and just delivering these lines, and it's just that I guess that cocky demeanor, you know.
mm,
I was like, yeah, that would be really good casting, you know.
yeah. I haven't seen Wolf Creek in a while. I saw it at the cinema when it came out, but
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
he
can
has that
see
kind of
that.
a that kind of cocky demeanor in the film, and I'm sure his range extends out beyond that, but still, that was who come to mind immediately, and I was like, well, he's not even British, he's Australian actor, but you know,
And
movie magic can happen, you know.
it would be just your luck that he would be the first capable adult you'd come across.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and like so many of these apocalyptic scenarios, you meet Bob and you soon find out that, that the real threat or the more immediate threat is,
Mm,
one of the so-called survivors.
yeah. Well, because I think, other people would just make it more difficult.
Mm,
Other people would make terrible situations more difficult.
yeah.
I mean, the opposite could be true. And you do hear these stories of saviors and angels and heroes, but I think it's just as likely, um, being as familiar with my own species as I am, that
Yeah.
people could present all kinds of problems you'd rather be without very quickly.
Yeah, and I was interested to hear that, of course, you wrote the screenplay of this before COVID. But the way that, Carl wakes up and he wakes up from this fever, it felt like this has come straight out of COVID. And it's like, imagining what would it be like if not only did you get COVID, but then by the time you're better again, you walk into this, you walk into effectively hell.
Yeah. Well, the novella and short story were pre-COVID. I think the screenplay I was writing it in part through 2020, but because I wanted only the kind of incapable and invalided remaining, but that character had to be able-bodied and not suffering from dementia. The flu is a really handy device, but maybe I was onto something.
Right. And I think in some ways, I mean, the protagonist, Carl, he kind of needs this. Which might be an odd thing to say, but beforehand, I mean, he's just had a divorce. There have been struggles in terms of like wanting children or not having children. And, this gives him a purpose. He was at his lowest point. And then, in some cruel twist of fate, he kind of becomes a father figure to these two children that he discovers and then has to protect.
Yeah, it's something that I think I've returned to in books. It's something I looked at to start with in the ritual, and I think it's this idea of men like us, post historical men who haven't fought in wars or dealt with um, massive depressions or global catastrophe, conflicts, and so forth. I mean, our fathers' generations didn't either. But how would we fare if we were put into one of these historical situations that was about survival? Um, and interestingly, I often think about the Ukraine war because they've had to summon so many civilian soldiers from ordinary walks of life that have ended up on this terrible front line, bombarded with artillery and drones and missiles. I mean, it's something like 60% of the casualties, I think, are from artillery. It's like the First World War. So, one day you're a school teacher or an accountant or, I don't know, a software developer, and then a few weeks training and you're in a foxhole in a freezing wood. You've gone from you're back in history in a very short period of time. Events have external events you've no control over have overwhelmed your country and your life, and you're forced to react and behave in a different way. So it's a kind of conflict I find very interesting um, in terms of a story. And I think there's always a part of me that kind of not is exactly expecting to be put in the same situation, but wouldn't rule it out. The way the world is going, um, and also it's more interesting for me, kind of dramatically, if the person doesn't have any special skills or any military experience or any special weapons. So is the kind of last person you'd want on your team. It's very much a very ordinary person, preoccupied with contemporary problems we can all recognize, um, and then suddenly has to fend for himself and other people that he encounters along the way. Um, do you sink or swim? Do you become the best you can be? Um, so I think it's a story about that as much as anything else. how good are you when it's put to the test?
Yeah, and I think it's true that a lot of us, particularly the last couple of generations, we've become very comfortable because we haven't had to face these challenges. But I mean, as this is something you think about a lot, I mean, in terms of your own life, have you deliberately cultivated any skills that would help in some sort of situation like this? I mean, I'm wondering how far your musings have taken you, because I mean, it's something I consider as well. And if we're spending a lot of our times in front of a computer, well, that's not going to translate to any sort of discernible survival skill if it's all taken away from us.
Unless you're a drone operator.
There you go.
Those guys, I think, have the best job, don't they, in the current conflict over there?
Right.
Um, the only time I felt a real chill, almost like my back was covered in frost, was it was in April of 2020. So the pandemic had started, and we were watching these horrendous news reports from New York, I think it was, China, and Italy, and we knew it was coming, and patient zeros were starting to pop up. In fact, even though we had the lowest infection rate, we actually had patient zero. That was a family that came back from a skiing holiday in Italy, but that was quickly contained. But in the April, so it was coming closer, but things were still relatively normal and under control. And then it was in. I just wandered up to the local supermarket one day in April, and we'd not had any problems with supply of food essentials. The supermarkets were open, the supermarkets were full, and I just went up one morning to pick up a couple of things, and the supermarket was empty, and there was a very kind of shell shocked assistant standing behind the till, and I just said to the cashier, "What happened?" And she said, like, people showed up, like they were waiting when we got here. People were driving camper vans into supermarkets and like filling trolleys. And it's the first time I thought, it was in that April, is that where we are already? Like people are stockpiling. That's right on the edge of human behavior that's completely unacceptable. Like selfishness is taking over now. And we're inundated with this sort of myth. Well, the Dunkirk spirit and the Blitz spirit, and we're all in it together. And I thought, very quickly that can become something else when food and resources are at stake. That was the only time in the pandemic that I actually felt some concern. And then within a few days, a week or so, the shelves were half full and things calmed down. And retailers were imposing limits on how much you could take. But, that only took a few weeks before people were driving trucks to supermarkets and buying all the pasta, panic buying. So the panic kicked in pretty quickly. But no, I mean, I'm not any kind of survivalist or what have you. I think since I've lived here and I do so much kayaking on the sea, I mean, that teaches you acquire a kind of competency um, for your own safety and handling different conditions and looking out for a group of paddlers, because we always paddle in groups. So you acquire a kind of competency. The other thing that I noticed it did teach me um, is a greater tolerance for discomfort, because we're always wet and we're in wind and there can be swell. And, the first year you do it, you're like, oh, this is horrible. I don't know if I'm going to do this again. Sitting in wet shorts for hours in a boat with the wind hitting you and your feet are wet. But actually, it stopped bothering me. And I thought, it can flip the other way. You can quickly become inured to discomfort. And when you have to be, when you're 2 miles out at sea or you're in swell or you've got to use support strokes, what have you, you can become competent in ways that you didn't think you could. You can underestimate yourself. Um, you can become better, I guess, than you thought you were in extreme situations. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time outdoors on the sea and a lot of time walking. Whether that would give me any advantage in a catastrophe, I don't know.
You haven't
Yeah.
gone full blown prepper yet, then, huh?
No, no, no. I've got good camping gear. Um,
Like I've noticed since the pandemic, more people growing their own food and vegetables and like trying to be more, I guess, like self sufficient. So I do wonder if we're going to see more of that come into play as well. Because you're right. I remember, like, I think it was kind of the end of February, the start of March in London and the Midlands, like people just panic buying, as you say. I remember there was a point where it was difficult to get toilet roll because just as soon as some came into stock, people would get as much as possible. And you talk to people and you'd ask like, why are you buying so much toilet roll? Are you okay? Is your stomach okay? What's going on here? But often the answer was they're panic buying because other people are panic buying. So it's this weird herd mentality.
uh,
So people didn't agree with it, but because other people were doing it, they're doing it as a response to it because they don't want to get left behind. And it
yeah.
is absolutely
Well, it's
ludicrous.
the supermarket I was talking to. The cashier said they weren't from round here because they'd recognise all the local shoppers, and I thought that's interesting. People coming
Hmm.
from another area to this one, they've emptied the supermarkets elsewhere. And the story that came to mind was the road.
Oh yeah.
Hmm. It's crazy because next week in the U.S., we're having a big eclipse, and the media, and now it's like almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy because some of the media outlets are saying that people are stocking up on supplies due to the eclipse. They're not really saying why. It does get mentioned, but there are eclipse chasers, people who go all over the country to watch these events, and they do end up staying in these cities and things where you're going to be in the path of totality or close of the path of totality of the eclipse, and they buy gas and toilet paper and food and things like that. And so I am 5 hours away from totality. And my mom is like, oh, it's all over the news. We're going to have to go get some gas in the cars. Something's going on with the eclipse. I'm like, did you pay attention to the news article, Mom? Did you listen? Why? It's because of the eclipse chasers. And she goes, what is that? What do they do? Well, they just want to watch the eclipse. They want to watch 4 minutes of total darkness during the day. Big deal. But I mean, it is on the media. And so we've kind of it's turned around as usual.
Yeah. Well, ideas are viruses, and they spread
Mm-hmm.
faster than the biological viruses.
Oh yeah.
Word gets out, something's running low. Every man for himself can kick in pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Although the smart people, I think, bought pasta because I'm reading recently that can last even thousands of years. They found some in the Valley of the Kings and cooked it like an um, ancient Egyptian version of pasta, and it was edible.
Wow. That's that's amazing. Thousands of years. That's crazy.
There are some things that just last. Oats, I think, is another one. Porridge oats.
Hmm.
So if you're going to stock up, porridge oats and pasta.
There you go.
Yeah, I think here in Japan it would be rice that you'd probably get. And I mean, in general, that there is so much rice in Japan that you can go down to the supermarket and you could buy a 20-kilogram bag of rice. If you can carry it back, then you can buy that. So that'd be fairly efficient panic buying, just just one item. I
Get a
mean,
few,
if
and then you can use them as sandbags.
yeah, yeah. Then you get to eat your rice and you get to have a good workout. Just a few bags of rice. But I mean, as I said before, this is also to a point concerned with parenting, this book, and I'm wondering, how has your daughter getting older changed you and changed your parenting and changed you as a person?
Oh, it's a big question.
Yeah, maybe a bit too big for past 2 a.m., but we're going for it.
I think in relation to this story, um, the the way that that's changed me becoming a parent, and it's, I guess, in a condensed version, it's the same as in this story. It obviously makes you responsible in a way that you've never been responsible before, because you're responsible for someone other than yourself that you care about more than yourself. And I think that's a really good thing. That level of responsibility, um, to have that as an adult. And I would go as far as to say that that was something that was missing for me until I became a parent. And although, having kids, and kids are tremendous sources of anxiety and fear and paranoia for their safety, that level of responsibility, if you embrace it, is it's only a good thing, and it makes you a better person. So I think that's something that I did write about. Somebody who had no experience with children, even something of an aversion to them, was put in a position where he became more or less a surrogate parent, um, for somebody else's kids, for strangers. Um, so his initial impulse or temptation was just to run away from that complication and responsibility. Um, who'd want to get saddled with that? But there was something better in him, I think, that overrode those selfish instincts. And that's one of the things, one of the things that occurs when you become a parent, is that responsibility, if you take it seriously, I think it does make you a better person, and you make a better contribution. Um, I mean, I think particularly my generation, we were I can't ever remember in the 80s or even into the 90s if there was ever any encouragement for anyone to have children. I mean, it was all about careers, it was all about your individual development. It was all about me, you know, and breaking out of this kind of traditional mold. Families were almost seen as, you know, family was almost seen as an impediment. It wouldn't be the same for every country and culture, but certainly in the West, at certain times, there was an emphasis on that. Um, so I became a parent. Didn't think I would, and I'm quite an old dad, but the benefits are enormous. And I think chiefly, um, as explored in the story, is this sense of responsibility, um, and prioritizing somebody other than yourself against all the odds.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
my
and I
throat was dried out.
no, well, I mean, we've
I've been vaping
been
for 18 hours.
well, vaping for 18, talking for getting on 3 hours, it's gonna do it. It's gonna take its toll. Just being up for what must be what, 20 hours now, so
It's
there's
it's
quite
it's getting
quite
on for that, yeah.
yeah, quite the session.
Well, it's a special
But
occasion.
yeah.
I only
Yeah.
speak to This Is Horror every 4 years.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a deliberate pattern, but yeah.
I was thinking what Bob said before was a great title for a horror story, The Path to Totality.
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
What
yeah.
was it? The is it totality where you get the best effects of the, is it a solar or lunar eclipse?
It's going to be a solar, and they, yeah, my area is going to get probably around 85%. So, but um, what I didn't know is that the areas that will get 100%, that you can actually view the eclipse without any type of protection because the sun will be completely covered. This particular year, due to disturbances and things in the atmosphere and the actual relationship between the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun, is going to be quite spectacular because of the solar activity around it, the corona and such. That we won't see another one like this. What NASA's saying for 20 years. So this particular one is drawing a lot of attention. And it's rare that it passes over so much of the U.S., so much of the central U.S. So, and people 5 hours away from me in Austin will have, I think it's like they're going to be pretty close to 100%. Whereas in my area, it's going to be, there's saying anywhere from 80 to 90. It's going to get dark during the day, you know, and it's going to get real dark for about 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And then, so the whole thing lasts maybe about 40 minutes or so. We had one a couple years ago, and as a matter of fact, we actually had a partial one last year that made the sky look funny for a little while, but we had a really good one. But this is the most significant one that I've had in my lifetime, and I'm gonna be 57 in June. So, but yeah, the path of totality, that's a
This, and it
I'm
sounds to
still
me, this one,
planting seeds in Adam's mind about future apocalyptic novels. Here we go.
well, this one, the big one that's coming at you, to me, sounds like the perfect pretext for a full scale alien invasion.
Oh yeah,
I think your mum's onto something.
yeah.
This just doesn't sound right. 4 minutes of total darkness, and the world will be different when the light
Hmm.
comes back on.
Yeah. That
I mean,
that
that's kind of the tagline right there.
yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And it reminds me because you this started off, as basically a short story, a novella turned into a screenplay. You have this really, really, really enviable ability to describe something without describing it, and creating a confusing, nightmarish imagery in your mind, with especially dealing with the aliens in this novel. And I didn't know it was a screenplay before this. Did you have to give like a more concrete description in the screenplay, or was that more or less left to director, producer, set designer interpretation?
No, you have to put it in. You have to give the I guess the blueprint for the
Right.
director. So in the screenplay, it had to be very succinct and very precise.
That's what I thought.
And
Yeah.
my big weakness with writing screenplays is there would be too much description, big blocks of text, and I would have to just winnow that down to a couple of lines, which again is a good discipline. It's a good practice. Um, so I would suggest the alien element, but obviously in the novel I had more space, more than 110 pages, but I still tried to keep it kind of suggestive and scant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and obviously, it's kind of what have you to say about the description, and I think about them, and for the horrors in this book, I I, I always tried to keep them slightly enigmatic,
Mm-hmm.
so they suggest lots of recognizable things. I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but they never become too defined.
Right.
They always had to remain somewhat indistinct, and you would catch more, you would see more in certain kinds of light.
Yes.
And I wanted them to, they're very multisensory. There's a sound, there's a smell, um, the imagery of how they move. Um, I even studied kind of how some animals moved. Um, so they were the most enjoyable bit about the whole book. The horrors, and also when they get people.
Yes. Yes. They are truly horrors. That's and that's it's like you want as a because as a writer, when I read, I can't help but to try to analyze something, and it was so it was very easy for me just to kind of forego that and go, you know what, I'm just going with the flow here because I want whatever imagery goes into my mind, and because my mind is going to conjure up the worst thing I can possibly think of, you know. And you used these very specific, very very unique words to describe this these horrors, and I've never seen anything like that, read anything like that. And then when you said it was a screenplay, I was like, oh, he had to have put it in like a surely he had to put in like a concrete definition of what these things look like, and to have to winnow that down. That was, man, that's some good stuff there.
Oh, thank you. That's an interesting point you made, though, because I always know usually with all of my books, there will be something that will divide readers. And in um, the people who looked at the screenplay, the meetings I had, I could see that division already forming. Because usually, if I think of alien invasion stories, novels I've read, films I've seen, or what have you, there's often an emphasis on the civilization, the alien civilization, its form, its structure, its purpose, its intent, the kind of mythology behind it. Um, and there'll be some people that would want that, that would demand that, or you can keep it more enigmatic and suggestive, which I think is kind of more Lovecraftian in a way. It's almost
Mm-hmm.
beyond your comprehension. You can't fully grasp it.
Right.
You can perceive it in part. So a lot of it will be down to the reception of the book. I think down to the taste of individual readers. And I know in the film industry, I think it's quite conservative when you think of the amount of money that's involved in making a film and the sort of audiences that filmmakers need to make a film a success. I think the emphasis is to err on the side of caution and leave nothing to chance. The only kind of example I can think of that really broke the mold and was all the better for it was A Quiet Place.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you only really saw, I think there's one scene where there's some newspaper clippings on a cork board that mentions an asteroid. Because usually you get a lot of detail and you get a lot of information, and that can be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even the Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien, if you really want to know where these things came from and how they were produced, and you want the kind of origin story to them. But if that's kept back from you, it's just hinted
Mm-hmm.
at or suggested at. To my taste, that's more powerful.
Oh
The
yeah.
kind of enigmatic route, um, but not so attractive to uh, big studios.
Yeah.
It seems.
Yeah. It's kind of like Dead Space with the marker and all of that. It's you have a mythology. There's a mythology there, but not going into it. That's that's pretty much the definition of cosmic right there. You know. And so, I think we see a little bit of that with the horrors, with the architecture, especially what they do with the dead, And
Yeah,
so, and so not to y'all need to read the book so we can quit spoiling it.
that's a suggestion of the culture that's been imported.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And there's always that dilemma with horror creators, whether to or whether not to show the monster. And then if you do, how much of the monster to actually
Mm.
reveal. Because as we've said, I mean, there's a great divide in terms of horror audiences. There are those who absolutely want to see the monster. There are those who, once you show it, you remove some of its power.
Mm.
And I actually think in the film adaptation of The Ritual, that was handled very, very well because you don't see the monster for a very long time. And then when you do, like, the payoff is remarkable, and they got the monster right, which,
Yeah. It's
that it's a big risk because if you get it wrong, it can spoil the entire movie.
Yeah. No, it's a good example. It's all about timing and execution, and that was in very capable hands. Um, because I remember when towards the end of the process, when there was the director's script, David had come on and he and Joe had produced the director's script. And I remember just sort of saying, that's a big reveal. But between, I think, Keith Thompson, who designed the god, and Joe's writing, and particularly David's directing, it was when I saw it at the cast and crew screening, I was so impressed with what they'd done. And the scene where the Jotun kind of rears up on its hind legs, you see the sky behind it, I thought was just genius. I actually got a bit of cosmic awe. But that was in the right hands, really, really talented people who knew exactly how to present it at the right time. It's not easy. I mean, there are shows, I can think of a couple that they almost go too far with Enigma, where they keep starting storylines. They almost get addicted to creating this kind of never-ending mystery. Do you remember Lost? It's kind of the Lost formula.
I
And it
do.
was sort of
Yeah.
addictive until it wasn't, until it until it became almost tiresome, or it was crossing the line into bewilderment and confusion. I thought that recent series, there's been 2 series, I think it's called Now. Have you seen it? Just
I
make
have
sure I've got
not
the right
seen
title.
Now.
And the first series, it's on Sky Atlantic, is really good.
From
Now. My
I was
memories.
thinking of other one-word titles that
Yeah,
had 2
Now.
seasons, and that's the only one I could come up with.
Where did I get Now from? From. The first one is terrific. And I thought the way that it deals with the mystery, the enigma,
Mm-hmm.
is really powerful. It's really quite an affecting show. I was so looking forward to the second series, but the second series, to my taste, went a bit down the sort of lost, multiple rabbit holes where nothing's ever going to be properly resolved or not credibly resolved. So, it is a balance.
So I have not seen From, but it sounds like that's a strong recommendation
Yeah,
for season 1, and
watch
then,
the first
you know,
series and then manage your
cap it at that.
expectations for series 2.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, we are finally coming up to the time that we have together this
Okay,
evening, this morning, this day. Time has lost meaning at this point.
I can get
But
to bed before 3 a.m.
I know, I know. I I wonder though, I mean, in terms of all the Fiends of Hell, who are perhaps some of the unexpected audiences for this book? I mean, this is obviously for the horror crowd, for the crowd who like alien horror as well, but who might some readers be that you might not necessarily imagine would go for an Adam Neville book?
Um, all I can say is, like with all the Ritual Limited books, I really do kind of write them for horror readers like myself, write them for myself and other horror readers. And I don't try to attract any readers beyond that. If they do, maybe some science fiction, or people that like speculative fiction, science fiction may like it. But I think the readers who are most likely to appreciate the book, or the book in part, will be readers of horror fiction. Beyond that, I haven't dared to speculate.
All right.
But I think
Sure.
if you're interested in alien invasion or cosmic horror or supernatural horror, I don't think you'd be disappointed. So within the wheelhouse of horror, I mean, that's quite a lot of subgenres and interests. I think it would appeal to people who enjoy supernatural horror,
Yeah.
cosmic horror, or kind of an alien horror.
Yeah.
That was my intention anyway, kind of creatively. Um, but I can't see masses of romance fans or sword and sorcery fans or cozy crime fans. Who knows? I might be underestimating them. I think they should. I think they should come in droves.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm not holding my breath.
And do you pay much attention to kind of reader reviews and feedback? Because I know, as an independent publisher, that this can become kind of more important to see how the readers are reacting and to get a sense of things. I mean, if you're published by a traditional publisher, it's probably easier to say, oh, I don't look at the Goodreads reviews. But as an indie publisher, an indie author who's doing everything, it might form part of the picture.
Oh, definitely, definitely. You're much closer to readers, and you have much more engagement. I mean, I have a newsletter now, and particularly in social media. I mean, I'm all about the readers. I still answer every message I get from readers, and interact as much as I can in social media and through the website and so forth. So my contact with readers is much more immediate. It's much closer now. You're at more of a remove, or authors used to be, but readers are the most important people in the room, and they are the only reason for your continuance as a writer. So I place a much greater emphasis on readers than I do other writers or kind of peer groups of writers. Um, and I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing for readers. It can be time consuming, but readers are worth it. And I always put them first, to be honest. Um, yeah, so I do keep an eye on the reviews. Um, I'm fortunate that I'd say over half of them are positive. Um, I read some of the bad reviews. I get plenty of those in some quarters, but I'm not affected by them so much because by the time I release a book, I'm satisfied that in the period of time I took to write the book, it's probably the best piece of work that I could have produced and released. So if it's not to someone's taste, um, I'm not going to beat myself up or suffer terrible insecurities or loss of confidence. But some of the negative ones are interesting in terms of getting a perspective of reader expectations, I suppose. And readers, they're not all the same. Readers are very, very different. it's hard to generalize about readers. I mean, ideal readers, to get enough ideal readers who will give each book a chance and know where you're coming from and tend to appreciate it, you can't put a price on them. Ideal readers are just, so valuable and make it all worthwhile.
And speaking of readers, where can they connect with you?
I'm on Facebook. I have an author page on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and my newsletter, monthly newsletter. That's been going now 9 years. And that, that's got a healthy following. So there's a lot of news recommendations in that, some backstories to the books, and I have a blog. So there are multiple channels that I keep going with some degree of consistency.
All right. And do you have any final thoughts for our listeners and viewers?
Just to say thanks to anyone that has gotten this far and has listened to this podcast, and that tries the book, that calls down the Fiends of Hell onto their bookshelves.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Bob. Good to see you again.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll get a date in the calendar for 2028.
We certainly will.